You ever get a bit of a daunting feeling when heading into a popular franchise for the first time? Silent Hill was huge back in the day, but thanks to Konami being Konami, the series hasn't really seen any action since 2012, after the demo for PT was pulled from the PlayStation Store. The franchise entered a limbo, and I'm sure many fans lost hope, but like many popular franchises, it's starting to get better. After many leaks turned out to be true, Konami announced several new projects for the franchise, and it's got people talking about it. It's exciting to see fans of a long-thought-dead franchise have something to look forward to, and after going back to Resident Evil 1, I thought, you know what, let's look at Silent Hill as well. That, and one of my friends has been pushing me to play this for a while now, so okay, let's go find out what makes the hill so silent. I haven't a clue. Totally eyeballing it here. Silent Hill started development in 1996 as a game that yearned to be popular in Western markets. However, it seems it didn't take very long for the developers to lose direction with the project, and Konami producers apparently lost faith in the game being any good. But with a decent amount of creative freedom on their side, the dev team began to go beyond Konami's original plan for the game and try to play off the audience's fear of the unknown. Apparently, the plot was initially pretty confusing and vague, but the artists for the game cleaned up the inconsistencies while designing the characters. How much so, I'll have to wait and see. I'm researching this before actually playing it. But I find it interesting that the town of Silent Hill is an interpretation of an American town from the perspective of a Japanese team, based on Western films and media. Apparently, this game was influenced by David Lynch films too. That was interesting to learn. Silent Hill was released in 1999 and was praised for its atmosphere and disturbing horror. Something less The Shining and more like a Japanese art house horror film. It was, of course, compared a whole lot to Resident Evil, almost like Konami's answer to that series. Throughout this video, I'll try not to overly compare the two. I just want to know what makes Silent Hill so popular, so let's get into this. Time to see what I've been missing. So, I enjoy this game, but not for the reasons I expected. It's a weird one for sure, so okay, if you asked me if I had any expectations before going in, I would have said, it's gonna be like Resident Evil, but with ghosts and fog. That's all I've got. And I suppose you could argue that I'm not that far off, but there's a lot more to it than that. But first, let's try and dissect the story of this one. Okay, so as soon as I learned this was going to be a psychological horror, I expected that the story would be vague, a bit up to interpretation, and oh boy, I wasn't wrong. So the story begins with Harry Mason driving his young daughter Cheryl out to the resort town of Silent Hill, where the pair plan to take a relaxing vacation. However, as you may have guessed, things get off to a rocky start as Harry swerves to avoid a girl walking across the middle of a street, and is knocked unconscious after a car crash. After a good nap, Harry wakes up to find that Cheryl is nowhere to be seen, and with not much to see due to the absurd amount of fog, Harry explores the area, seeing Cheryl run away from him down an alley, to which he gives chase. Sick camera angles when coming down here, by the way, I was impressed by that. But yeah, as you may have guessed, Harry's not alone. The sky darkens and the area transforms into a much darker, much more dangerous place, with bodies hung on the mesh of fences and industrial sounds deafening us. I've gotta say, this is a damn strong intro that really made me feel tense of what was to come. Like, what the fuck is happening here? Harry is soon jumped by these creatures that grab him just a tad too low, and it seems all hope is lost. However, we find ourselves waking up in a nearby cafe being looked over by Sybil Bennett, an officer from a nearby town who has also noticed that the entire town seems to be completely abandoned. After Sybil leaves to investigate, Harry arms himself, and just in time too, as a weird bat thing comes smashing through the glass confirming no, this isn't a dream. Anyway, after exploring a part of Silent Hill and discovering that the roads have been obliterated, leaving no chance of escape, Harry follows a clue leading him to Midwich Elementary School in search of Cheryl. After travelling through the school, avoiding these little grey bastards trying to shank us, Harry finds himself seemingly travelling between worlds as we end up in a very fucked up version of the school with the same mechanical vibe the intro had. We also speak to Cheryl on the phone for here like a second, and get used to that as that's all we're going to see of her throughout. I get it, she's alive, so let's move on. After eliminating the school's pest problem, we run into the girl from the start who just vanishes. Okay, and as confused as we are, Harry leaves the school and follows the sound of ringing church bells, introducing us to Dahlia Giuseppe, a frankly crazy sounding woman who talks utter nonsense and gives us a funky triangle for our troubles. She tells us to go to the hospital, so we do that, and end up encountering Michael Kaufman, who nearly blows our head off. He doesn't really have much interesting to say though, so we continue on and meet another new face, Lisa Garland. She also hasn't got a clue what's going on, and before we can chat to her more, we end up back in the real world, where Dahlia appears to warn us of the Mark of Samael, this Illuminati-esque symbol that's been all over the place so far. Apparently, if the symbol is completed, darkness will devour the town. We meet back up with Sybil briefly in an antique store where the pair discover an altar for God knows what, but then, as it seems impossible for things to just be straightforward, we end up going back to the hospital to see Lisa again, who tells us how to get to the lake after Sybil mentioned she saw a little girl walking towards it. A quick trip through the sewers later, and we end up near the lake where the dark world seems to be completely taking over the town, leaving Harry with very little time to save his daughter. We bump into Sybil and Dahlia on this little boat where we are urged to stop what's happening, so we split up with Sybil and head to a nearby lighthouse where we briefly catch a glance at the ghost girl but end up not doing much and head to reunite with Sybil in the amusement park. It's not a happy reunion, however, as Sybil has been possessed by something, and depending on how you do things, you can save her or kill her. I, unfortunately, killed her because fuck, I don't know what I'm doing, but okay, we press on and find the ghost girl, where Harry finally remembers the magic triangle and traps her within it. It turns out this is exactly what Dahlia wanted, as Harry was the only person that could get close enough to do it, and that this girl was actually her daughter. The girl's power goes out of whack and we awaken in nowhere. Okay, now, as you've seen, the story sort of just keeps going up to this point. Now, while I understand that there are some bits of story that I might have missed, I'm definitely not making sense of most things here. But God, I hadn't seen anything yet. So, within nowhere, we find Lisa, who pleads with us to save her. But, I mean, you're the nurse. Anyway, she begins to bleed down her entire face, and definitely the most memorable part of the game I experienced. This part really took me off guard because, well, look at her. That's gruesome as fuck. A quick glance at her diary afterwards reveals that the ghost girl called Alyssa was secretly hospitalized for some reason, I'm not sure, but Lisa was her nurse. It wasn't a good time for anyone though, as Alyssa's never healing wounds scarred Lisa, as she fell deeper and deeper into a drug obsession fueled by Kaufman. Turns out, Dahlia had conducted a ritual when Alyssa was young to allow her to birth a deity. How did she do this? I have no idea, but she did, and apparently this somehow split her soul into two halves, one becoming the spirit of Alyssa, and the other, Cheryl. I didn't pick up that she was adopted. I'm really not sure, this has almost completely lost me. Now, it's here where the ending splits depending on your actions. And for me, like I said, I don't know what I'm doing, so I got the bad ending. We kill the deity that shows up and Cheryl passes on, and it turns out Harry died in the crash. Oh. However, in the good ending, the deity restores the town and passes Harry an infant, which is in fact a reincarnation of Cheryl and Alyssa. I'm sure Harry's relieved about this, but I bet man's like, oh fuck, this bitch is gonna need diapers again. Sybil can survive and escape with you if you do things right for some endings. And I'd be remiss to mention the joke ending where Harry gets abducted by aliens. That's actually pretty funny. I don't know what to think of this story. The way things are left vague help add to the intrigue, but my ending was absolutely lame. It's the bad ending, I get it, but I had no idea, did I? And it just doesn't seem to be very clear as how you even get the best ending. I enjoyed the journey for sure, and some scenes were truly great. But as a story, I don't know. I really don't know. I'll give it this though, the voice acting, while not stellar by any means, is of a much better quality than the original Resident Evil. However, it's nowhere near as entertaining. Don't get me wrong, it's better for atmosphere, but some of these cutscenes drag on. There's also not a lot of body movement, leading to really stilted scenes with very little of what I would describe as eye-catching. It can work in selling how weird this whole scenario is, but it made it harder to care about anyone. The FMVs are at the very least a great quality, I just wish there was a few more of them. The game underneath this is a horror game on the PlayStation, but to my surprise, I can't really class this as survival horror. In fact, this ended up reminding me more of a classic 3D Zelda game. Big open overworld? Check. Dungeons? Check. Items only useful within said dungeons? Sort of. I really wasn't expecting to be making this comparison, but that's sort of what it is. But unlike Zelda, we are using tank controls here, which of course comes with their own set of complications. Being fair though, I think the controls here are miles better than in Resident Evil. I don't know whether it's just the lack of a fixed camera angle, the fact that the control is generally better, but rarely did I find moving Harry about to be a problem, even when inside buildings. But yeah, no fixed camera angles, and you can even center the camera behind you with the press of a button. A feature ahead of its time for sure, selectively, as sometimes it works, and other times it decides to just strangely pan over the room you're in. But it's never a problem outside and should allow you to see enemies coming with no issue, if the radio static doesn't give them away first. Yeah, so whenever an enemy is anywhere near you, this weird static sound will play from the radio you acquire right at the start. It's great for giving you a warning of what might be ahead, especially with the massive amount of fog you'll be wading through in the overworld. However, it's really bad for removing any and all tension combat encounters can bring, because no matter what, if something's there, you'll know. And as the game showers you with ammo, I'm not kidding, I consistently had over 100 bullets in my handgun, you can really just gun everything down without much of a problem. In normal difficulties anyway. Initially I was playing this like Resident Evil, avoiding encounters when possible in an attempt to save ammunition. However, with the amount of ammo thrown at me, as well as Harry being pretty adept in combat, I found this unnecessary and began to simply shoot my way out of every problem. You know, for highly trained agents in the STARS unit, Chris and Jill could really do with taking some notes from everyman Harry here. Not only can Harry lock onto targets without the need of a revised version, but he can actually move while shooting. This means as long as you have room, you can just back away from the enemies as you shoot them, meaning they're very unlikely to actually hit you. The enemies will often make a beeline towards you, true, but as they just stop when they reach you, just walk backwards. It works 90% of the time. Hey though, the enemies might not be aggressive, but they definitely need to learn the meaning of consent. The whole game really doesn't respect his dignity. Jesus Christ, poor Harry. 2 minutes into the game and I'm getting sucked off by this little bastard here. There's health items that are just butt plugs and you can't convince me otherwise. Then later in the game, these ape-like enemies just mount him from behind. My man's getting violated. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, so Harry has a few options when it comes to combat besides firearms. There are melee weapons like knives, axes, and even a bloody emergency hammer, but they are pretty unwieldy and it never feels particularly good to use or reliable to land a hit from my experience. The only melee move I like is the kick you can do to finish off an enemy after doing enough damage, normally with a gun. So I'll stick with firearms, thank you, for enemies and bosses. These aren't great really, you sort of just move and shoot awkwardly till the boss drops. Better than in Resident Evil I guess, but that's not a high bar when the topic of boss fights is brought up, is it? Structurally, okay, so like I said, it's almost like a Zelda game. The town of Silent Hill acts as an overworld and you can run around in any direction you want. Now, early in the game, any objectives are marked on your map, which does a great job of giving you an idea of where to go. But for some stupid reason, they stopped doing this in the second half. Now, it's not so bad, sometimes. For the most part, the cutscenes will still point you where you need to go, but I still think it's pretty stupid to just stop using the map markers. But anyway, the overworld really just acts to connect the dungeons, but it's not as simple as just walking from point A to point B, as many of the roads are destroyed, so you'll have to find ways to cut through buildings or through shopping centres with gigastores because apparently Megamart was already taken. There are things to find in the streets beside the mandatory stuff, but I'd be remiss for not mentioning the main reason it doesn't work, the fog. You just can't talk about this game without mentioning the fog. Look, you've got these areas trying to look as realistic and detailed as possible with a camera that can see in any direction, and I can respect that, but they knew the hardware was going to have a bad time trying to render all this, so in order to mask the tremendous amount of pop-in, they added a thick layer of fog, and it works, sure, but it makes navigating an absolute nightmare. Because I mean, look at this, can you tell any of this footage apart? I totally get why this was done, but it makes the whole of Silent Hill's town feel homogeneous. There's not a lot of places that stick out as landmarks because I can't even see them. I just have to know that this is a hospital, this is a church. When you're in the alternate world and it's nighttime, you can see the pop-in clear as day, and yet it's still so hard to see anything. What's the point here? There are enemies about outside, but as you have so much room most of the time, it's very easy to just avoid them. For the most part, it's just these weird bat fuckers who love popping in and giving you a boop on the head and leaving. But later you'll have these guys who are pretty rapid and relentless. You gotta know where you're going and not stop moving to avoid these ones without a fight. The overworld is fine. It's not super exciting, but I'll admit, it gets the atmosphere down. The dungeons, on the other hand, are a lot more compact and self-contained. For one, you can actually see when you're inside, and in general, these parts feel a lot more tense. The lighting is surprisingly good, and your torch will reveal horrors right in front of your eyes in dark areas. I suppose if you wanted to compare it, these areas are the more Resident Evil-y parts of the game, as you explore buildings with narrow corridors, find keys for locked rooms, and solve puzzles to progress. But I still prefer the Zelda comparison, as these are very much self-contained areas and continue to give you a free camera. You also won't be revisiting these places much after completing them, as key items are normally one use. You won't get keys that open up huge areas, it'll just be one door, and as item space isn't limited, it's literally about finding the right thing and solving the puzzle related to it. Nothing complicated about that. You have unlimited saves, and there's even checkpoints before bosses, meaning death is a flick on the wrist most of the time. It's not hard to grasp at all, not even when you end up in the alternate versions of these areas. Nope, it's essentially just a continuation of the current dungeon, except now everything is covered in shit. Gotta say though, the elementary school didn't leave me with the best first impression. I mean, this place was so confusing to me. I got that the clock was dictating which riddle I had to solve first, but I don't get why we had to do them in a certain order. Even then, the puzzles themselves were just obnoxious. Especially in the alternate world, where I got to the roof, tried to flush the key down by using the ball on the drain, only for the game to tell me something could block it, but actually mean that I was checking the wrong hole. That was really stupid, and it didn't give me much hope for what was to come. But I must stress, it did get better after this. I mean, the hospital was a really fun area, with clever puzzles that tested your powers of observation and experimentation, but never asked for too much. Also, this is a terrible hospital. The men's toilets have urinals, but no actual toilets. What happens if you need a shit? Huh? The sewers were more of a mini dungeon, but it still managed to confuse the fuck out of me until I found a map. Though I did enjoy this part where it was like, oh fuck, I'm surrounded. Bye. The final dungeon, Nowhere, is a bit of a pain in the ass. There's a lot of rooms and a lot of puzzles, one even involving you needing to know astrology, which, I mean I do, but why? It's not the worst dungeon in the world, but you might need to follow a guide for this one too. The dungeons are okay, and I would say that they're the best part of the game. And yeah, that's the game. And I enjoyed myself, but if I'm being honest, not even close to the same level of the original Resident Evil. Despite the fact I think this is the more mechanically sound game. But Resident Evil, despite its flaws, made me feel tense when choosing my battles, sorting my inventory, and trying not to blow too much ammo. Here I sort of just pushed ahead, never really needing to think about how I approach combat encounters. Yeah, I got stuck on a few puzzles, but I think most people would on a first run. It was a relatively comfortable experience, but I can't see myself coming back to this one anytime soon. However, I am genuinely glad to have played this, and I'm sure it's a safe bet that Silent Hill 2 will be much better. Anyway, I think I'm done with horror for now. Although I do have an idea for another video in this area soon, but we'll have to wait on that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.